You're standing around a fire. It's 50,000 BC. The sun just went down. There's no phone, no Netflix, no quiet dread about your inbox. There's just you, the flames, and thick smoke curling straight into your face. And at some point, one of your ancestors looked at that smoke and thought something like, "What if I did that on purpose?" This is the story of how humans discovered smoking. Not cigarettes, not cigars, not the guy outside your office building you always end up talking to for 10 minutes too long. We're talking about the very first time a human being intentionally breathed in something burning, and why that might be one of the oldest habits our species has ever picked up. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Smoking doesn't start with tobacco. It doesn't start with colonial trade routes or Native American ceremonies, or even agriculture. The urge to inhale smoke might be wired into us on a level so deep it predates civilization completely, and the evidence for that is genuinely strange. Start with fire itself, because you can't smoke anything without it first. Fire has been part of the human story for an enormous stretch of time. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use by our ancestors comes from Vanderwerk Cave in South Africa, dating back roughly 1 million years. Archaeologists found burnt plant ash and charred bone there, not the leftovers of a wildfire, but a sustained, contained fire, deliberately maintained inside a cave. 1 million years ago, we weren't even Homo sapiens yet. That was Homo erectus, our earlier cousin, smaller brain, heavier brow, and zero interest in being told what to do with either. They sat around fires the same way we still do. They cooked, they stayed warm, they huddled together in the dark. And they breathed smoke, constantly, every single day, for hundreds of thousands of years. It was unavoidable. It was the original air quality situation, and nobody had an app to check it. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, though. Not all of that smoke was just ordinary wood smoke. Burn organic material, and you don't only get carbon dioxide and water vapor. You get a whole cocktail of compounds depending on exactly what's burning. Certain plants release psychoactive chemicals when they combust. Alkaloids, terpenes, compounds that interact with the human nervous system in ways that are, let's say, noticeable. Which means some of our ancestors were almost certainly getting accidentally high around the campfire, with absolutely no idea why they suddenly felt incredible. This isn't some fringe idea either. Researchers have argued for decades that early humans living in forested regions would have been regularly exposed to smoke from psychoactive plants, cannabis, wild tobacco relatives, and various other naturally occurring entheogens scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia. And here's the detail that makes this land differently. The human brain has receptors that respond directly to cannabinoids. Those receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of the endocannabinoid system, which regulates mood, memory, and appetite, among other things. But their existence means that the first time a human inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain wasn't confused by it at all. It was already built to respond. That accidental first hit, one prehistoric evening beside the wrong bush at the wrong campfire, might genuinely be the true origin of smoking. Not a decision, not a plan, just a very pleasant accident repeated often enough that someone eventually thought to recreate it on purpose. Sit with that for a second. The entire multi-trillion-dollar global tobacco industry, centuries of ritual, shamanic tradition, medical practice, and social custom may all trace back to one tired hunter who happened to sit downwind of the wrong plant and had an unexpectedly great evening. History is occasionally beautiful in the most absurd way possible. Now, we do have to be careful about timelines here, because ancient humans smoked things and ancient humans deliberately cultivated things specifically to smoke are two very different claims. So let's look at what the archaeology actually shows. The oldest direct evidence of intentional cannabis use, meaning burned seeds found in a context that clearly suggests deliberate inhalation, comes from a burial site in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dating to around 500 BC. Excavators found wooden braziers there containing stones that had been superheated, along with residue from cannabis plants carrying unusually high THC content. This wasn't wild cannabis harvested for rope or seeds. This was specifically potent material, placed directly inside a ritual burial context roughly 2,500 years ago. But here's the question that should be sitting quietly in the back of your mind. Does the absence of older physical evidence actually mean this didn't happen earlier? Or does it just mean nobody's found it yet? Organic material, seeds, leaves, plant fiber, almost never survives thousands of years in the ground. We find stone tools from 3 million years ago constantly because stone is basically indestructible. A wooden pipe filled with dried herbs is gone within a few centuries under normal burial conditions. A leather pouch of cannabis dissolves back into the earth long before any archaeologist ever shows up with a trowel. Absence of evidence in this specific case is genuinely not the same thing as evidence of absence. There's also what you could call the Herodotus problem. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian writing in the 5th century BC, described in remarkable detail the Scythians, a nomadic people from the Eurasian steppe, performing what he called a vapor bath. They'd set up small enclosed tents, heat stones until they glowed, and throw hemp seeds directly onto those stones, then sit inside inhaling the smoke and, in his own words, howling with pleasure. For centuries afterward, historians simply assumed he was exaggerating or misunderstanding whatever he'd actually witnessed. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds and found exactly what you'd expect by now: bronze braziers, heated stones, hemp residue. Precisely what Herodotus described in detail. He wasn't embellishing anything. If anything, he was underselling it. Let's talk about tobacco, because it's the one most people actually associate with smoking. Tobacco belongs to the genus Nicotiana, and it's native specifically to the Americas. That fact matters enormously, because it means tobacco was completely unknown across the entire Old World, Europe, Africa, Asia, until contact with the Americas in the late 15th century. When European explorers reached the Caribbean in 1492, they immediately noticed indigenous people doing something they'd never seen before. Columbus himself wrote in his journal about watching men and women walk around holding small glowing sticks, inhaling smoke from burning dried leaves and letting it back out through their noses and mouths. His crew found it baffling. His crew also, within a few weeks, tried it themselves, because of course they did. But tobacco use across the Americas is far, far older than 1492. Archaeological evidence, specifically chemical residue found inside ancient pipes, has been dated back at least 3,500 years in what's now the southeastern United States. Some researchers believe the timeline stretches considerably further, possibly 10,000 years or more, tied to early cultivation in the Amazon basin. And here's the part that matters most about tobacco in ancient America. It wasn't recreational, not primarily. It was sacred. Tobacco was used in healing rituals, in communication with the spirit world, in binding formal agreements between tribes. Blowing smoke onto someone was an act of blessing, of connection, of genuine respect. A shaman who smoked wasn't taking a casual break. He was opening a channel between the living and the divine. The smoke itself was understood as a living carrier, a messenger moving between worlds, carrying prayers upward and bringing visions back down. That framing matters because it explains why tobacco use stayed so disciplined, so ritualized, so tightly controlled across many indigenous cultures for thousands of years. When something is sacred, you treat it with reverence. You don't chain smoke it in front of the television. The idea of tobacco as an ordinary, everyday habit, something you reach for on a lunch break or while waiting for a bus, is an almost entirely European invention, and a fairly recent one at that. Now let's go back even further, because there's a piece of this story most people have genuinely never heard, and it might be the oldest evidence of intentional smoking in the entire archaeological record. In 2019, researchers made a remarkable discovery at a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. They found a hearth, a cooking and heating fire roughly 12,000 years old, containing seeds of Nicotiana attenuata, a wild tobacco species native to North America. These weren't seeds that had simply blown into the fire by accident. They were concentrated, positioned in a way that strongly suggests deliberate placement. The site predates any known pottery or pipe artifacts in the entire region by thousands of years, which pushed the possible timeline of tobacco use in the Americas back significantly. and raised a genuinely fascinating question. If people were deliberately throwing tobacco onto fires 12,000 years ago, whether to inhale the smoke for ritual purposes or both, what were people doing with their own local psychoactive plants everywhere else on Earth at that exact same moment? Because 12,000 years ago, humans were already spread across Africa, Asia, Europe, and Australia, and the drive to alter consciousness deliberately isn't some regional American quirk. It's a human one. Here's something that might sound wild at first, but is taken seriously by respected anthropologists: the intoxication hypothesis. Across virtually every human culture ever documented, people have actively sought out ways to alter their own consciousness. They've drunk fermented beverages, eaten psychedelic mushrooms, inhaled smoke, chewed plant leaves, swallowed seeds. This pattern is so universal and so persistent across unrelated cultures that some researchers believe it isn't accidental at all. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed back in the 1980s that the pursuit of intoxication functions as a fourth biological drive, sitting right alongside hunger, thirst, and sex, embedded in animal behavior generally, not just in humans. Elephants deliberately seek out fermented marula fruit. Reindeer in Siberia have been observed eating Amanita muscaria mushrooms, then drinking the urine of other reindeer who'd already eaten them, because the psychoactive compounds pass through mostly intact. Reindeer, running an informal drug recycling program in Siberia. The underlying point is this: if the drive to alter consciousness runs this deep and this old, it's entirely reasonable to propose that early humans, long before domesticating a single plant, long before pottery or pipes or any of the tools we normally associate with smoking, were deliberately exposing themselves to smoke from psychoactive plants, simply because experience had already taught them it changed something inside their minds. Maybe they burned specific plants on purpose during rituals. Maybe they chose campsites near certain plants for exactly this reason. Maybe they learned, through trial and error, which smoke made you feel good and which smoke made you feel like you were dying, a distinction that, with some plants, only teaches you once. This is prehistoric trial and error, extremely high stakes, occasionally fatal. But the people who survived remembered. They told others. They passed the knowledge down across generations who never wrote a single word of it down, but lived it instead. That's how most human knowledge actually worked for most of human history. Not libraries, not schools. Lived experience, passed mouth to ear, around a fire, in the dark. There's another angle to this story worth sitting with. Smoking as medicine, long before it was recreational, and long before it was purely spiritual. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical documents on Earth, dates to ancient Egypt around 1550 BC. It describes treatments involving the inhalation of smoke from heated herbs, specifically for conditions affecting the throat and lungs. That sounds wildly counterintuitive from a modern viewpoint. Ancient Egyptians treated lung problems by inhaling smoke? Yes, genuinely. And the specific herbs involved, including henbane and various aromatic plants, do carry real pharmacological effects when inhaled. Ancient Greek medicine used fumigation, therapeutic smoke, regularly and deliberately. Hippocrates, the same figure doctors still swear an oath named after today, wrote directly about inhaling herbal vapors to treat lung disease and other conditions. That thinking wasn't irrational by the standards of the time. Smoke reaches the lungs almost immediately, so delivering a medicinal plant through smoke made logical sense. We still lean on that exact same logic today, with asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, nebulizers. The delivery method survived. The burning part, thankfully, mostly didn't. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine, dating back more than 3,000 years, describes a practice called dhumapana, literally smoke drinking, involving inhalation of medicinal herbs through pipes, with specific plants, conditions, and preparations refined across centuries. Across ancient China, Mesopotamia, Greece, and India, essentially every early civilization on record shows evidence of people inhaling smoke deliberately for therapeutic reasons, not because they were addicted, because it worked, or at least worked often enough that people kept doing it. In a world with no antibiotics and no surgery, worked sometimes was a genuinely meaningful bar to clear. There's one more angle to this story that doesn't get nearly enough attention: Social bonding. Humans are deeply social animals. We evolved living in groups, and group cohesion, the ability to stay together, trust each other, and act in coordination, was a literal matter of life and death across most of our evolutionary history. Isolated individuals tended to die. Groups tended to survive. Anything that reinforced social bonding carried real survival value, and shared rituals, including shared consumption of psychoactive substances, turn out to be extraordinarily effective tools for exactly that kind of cohesion. When a group undergoes a shared, altered experience together, it creates a sense of connection and mutual trust that's genuinely difficult to build any other way. Modern neuroscience backs this up directly. Shared ritual measurably synchronizes neural activity, increases trust, and deepens group identity. So when ancient humans sat together in an enclosed space, breathing in smoke from burning cannabis or other plants, and collectively entered an altered state together, that wasn't simply recreation. That was social infrastructure. Exactly how you built the kind of deep, tested trust that let a group walk into dangerous situations together and make it back out alive. The ritual smoke circle wasn't a party, it was survival architecture. And this is where the story turns genuinely uncomfortable. The shift from sacred smoke to casual throwaway habit is, historically speaking, an absolute disaster. When tobacco reached Europe in the 16th century, it spread at a speed that should feel familiar. Within decades, smoking went from an exotic curiosity to something close to a continental obsession. By the 1600s, tobacco was already traded globally. By the 1700s, snuff had become fashionable across European aristocracy. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. By the early 1900s, the industrially manufactured cigarette had been invented, making tobacco cheaper, more convenient, and considerably more addictive than anything before it. What had taken indigenous peoples across the Americas thousands of years to fold into a measured, ritualistic, deeply cultural practice was, in the hands of European industrialists, turned into a mass-market consumer product inside roughly 4 centuries. The tobacco industry in the 20th century then spent decades and billions of dollars actively suppressing internal evidence its own scientists had already compiled, that cigarettes caused cancer. They marketed cigarettes directly to children. They paid doctors to publicly endorse their products. They added chemical compounds specifically engineered to make nicotine hit faster and clear the body more quickly, maximizing addiction by design. They took something ancient, ritualistic, and communal, and re-engineered it into a product built to be as physically destructive and as financially extractive as the technology of the time allowed. A shaman and a tobacco executive both worked with essentially the same plant. They had almost nothing else in common. The moral distance between a shaman in 500 BC placing cannabis on heated stones inside a sacred burial and a tobacco executive in 1960 signing off on marketing cigarettes to teenagers is one of the wider moral chasms in recorded human history. Both involve smoke. Almost nothing else lines up. So when did ancient humans actually start smoking? The honest answer is that we don't know exactly, and we probably never fully will. The physical evidence carries us back roughly 12,000 years with real confidence, and possibly much further with reasonable, well-informed speculation. The underlying behavioral drive itself, the desire to alter consciousness, to share ritual experience, to use inhaled substances as medicine, is almost certainly far older than any single artifact we've recovered. It may be as old as fire itself. It may be as old as the specific cognitive leap that made us human in the first place. The ability to connect cause and effect, to look at a burning plant and think, last time that happened, I felt different. Let me try that again. That's not addiction. That's intelligence, applied to a very old and very flammable question. What we do know for certain is this: the behavior is extraordinarily old. It predates agriculture. It predates pottery. It predates every single civilization you ever learned about in school. By the time written history begins anywhere on Earth where humans had settled, they were already finding ways to put smoke into their own bodies. The specific plants changed, the rituals changed, the purposes changed considerably over time, but the underlying behavior itself was already ancient long before anyone thought to write any of it down. There's something almost poetic in that. For everything that separates modern humans from our ancestors, the technology, the medicine, the internet, the genuinely baffling amount of content we consume every single day, there are a few thin threads of continuity running unbroken through 100,000 years of human experience. Fire, smoke, breath. The earliest humans sat around fires and breathed the same kind of smoky air you'd smell at a bonfire tonight. At some point, some of them started paying closer attention to what that smoke was actually doing to them. Then they started choosing it on purpose. Then they started passing that choice down to their children and their children's children, all the way to Scythians howling with pleasure inside their tents, Egyptian physicians prescribing henbane smoke for aching lungs, and a nervous crew of European sailors on a Caribbean beach coughing until their eyes watered, trying tobacco for the very first time in their lives. Either way, next time you flip a light switch, or sit around a summer fire, or catch a stray whiff of wood smoke on a cold night, you're taking part in something considerably older than you probably realized a few minutes ago. You're doing exactly what humans have always done. You're breathing.